Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. I have a layout process video for you today as part of 2 challenges. I'm working on the first counterfeit kit challenge of the month and also the Mix It Up Monday challenge for the month. So let's go ahead and dive straight in. So I should warn you, we have 2 new kittens in the house right now and they're very rambunctious. So if you hear banging and clanging, that is what's going on. All right, in terms of this layout, I've got these 3 smaller photos. They're 3x4 photos, and I'm going to use those along with my counterfeit kit since I am doing counterfeit kit challenge, and that challenge is to use wood grain and flowers. I almost forgot, but there we go. So that's the first thing I'm going to pull out is wood grain. And then for the Mix It Up Monday challenge, we always have a sketch and then we add our mixed media to it. I will pop the sketch up in the corner. And the mixed media that I actually have in my counterfeit kit this month is these mica watercolor paints. And those paints actually show up on black. So I also have that Vicki Boutin black foundations paper. So I think the 2 challenges this month land on the same day and mesh really well together. So we're going to make it happen. So I did go ahead and trim down my photos, and I'm going to trim down this black to leave a nice big border with that wood grain so we still get a sense of that wood grain going on. So I believe I'm cutting my black down to 10 inches by 10 inches. And once I get that onto my wood grain, I think it needs a little bit more. So I am ruffling through my kit to see what other kind of pattern paper I can pull out and add one more layer into the mix. So as I shuffle through, I'm going to go ahead and pick out a couple of different options here, and I start shuffling back and forth between them to see what I like, and I decided I like this floral paper. Not only is it floral for that challenge, but also it has a lightness to it that is going to help counterbalance all of that black. Off camera, I did pull out my watercolors in colors that would kind of go with that floral paper. They're not exact matches, but that's okay. I also worked on my title. Unfortunately, I stuck those stickers on butcher paper and they stuck to the plastic layer of the butcher paper. So you'll see later how that becomes a disastrous mess. But in the meantime, I have got those layers done for my backdrop, and now I'm trying to figure out how these photos are going to sit, because the sketch had 3 photos stacked on top of each other, and my photos aren't going to work that way because I have 1 portrait or 2 portraits and 1 landscape, and that's just not going to work. So I am going to create a cluster of photos instead, and I'm going to kind of work in the same zones as the sketch, just with a different flow to things. So I mark on my mat with some tape the general area that I want to fill in with some watercolor. At first I think I'm just going to go around the border, but then I realized that there is a gap in between how I had laid out my photos, and I will go back and add in some more watercolor to the center of this, even though most of it's going to be covered. That way any gaps that I have in my photos will end up having some of this shine and shimmer behind it. And really, this is not complicated. I am just wetting down my paper in a general zone where I want the paint to go, and then I'm using wet paint and just kind of splotching it into the wet areas of the paper, and that kind of gives it a very organic vibe to it. It will flow a little bit on this wet paper, not as much as it would flow on regular watercolor paper, but that's okay. I'm just trying to get some color down so that there's some shine and shimmer behind these photos that act as a matte instead of having lots of paper to matte things. With that done, I am ready to add some color behind where I want the title to go. Now, these zones are ending up to be a little bit more jam-packed than I expected them to be. I'm just going to make do. So in the title zone, I'm just making stripes with these colors, kind of rainbow order, and blending them a little bit as we go. The mica paints don't blend as well as other colors, but they will a little bit. So I'm just doing the best I can here. I did decide I wanted the focal photo here, which is the highlight of the story. It's kind of a day trip we took, and on that day trip, I discovered a new craft store, and the day trip was because my daughter had an event in a town that was about an hour and 15 minutes away. And so we had to drop her off super early in the morning, and my husband and I were wandering around in that neck of the woods, just hanging out and checking out the area since we hadn't been there too much. We drove up a mountain until we hit some snow. We found a park. But whenever I'm somewhere new, I always Google where's the nearest scrapbook store, and there so happened to be something that popped up on on the maps. And so I was like, hey, let's go check it out. And it turns out it's kind of closer towards me and in a town where one of my daughter's friends lives. And I had no idea this little store was here. And it was fun to actually find somewhere new, local-ish. It's close enough that I can drive there if I need to. And I have for various things. This story was actually from about 2 years ago. So a little over 2 years ago now. So yeah, it was fun to have that be the highlight of this little outing. And we did have to keep ourselves busy that day because we had to make sure we picked up our daughter at the end of her event. All right, what I'm doing here while I'm telling you about the story is just kind of practicing what all the elements of the layout will be, trying to figure out how I want those photos to overlap for sure. I pulled out some scraps from doing the black mat as well as the little paper that I used to map the photo. I want to bring that paper and kind of pull it around to other areas of the layout so it's not just this oddball all by itself. So I'm going to use that to those two pieces to create a very long tag that will work as another element to this layout and as a journaling block. So it's going to kind of span the side of the layout and take up kind of two zones that were on the sketch instead of my title and journaling being in the one area. So to make my little tag, I just equally measure, I think I did 1/2 inch from each corner and then clipped it off, and then I will just line it up with that background matte paper and do the same thing to leave a border and give it a hole punch. And then I have this really long tag. I don't know how long it's going to need to be in the end. So as I tie it up here with some twine, because I did tie some twine on the focal photo, I want to add that twine to other areas, and I will leave that tag unfinished until my layout's ready for it. So I'm still waiting for that watercolor to dry. I pulled out one of my favorite Starburst circle punches, and I'm going to go ahead and keep working with that same pattern paper that I used to map the photo and continue creating elements for embellishment clusters. Now in the sketch we had one embellishment cluster to the left of the photos and then one kind of in the upper right. My tag is going to end up holding that upper right space as it moves down to the title area. So you'll see how I fill in the gaps with adjusting that embellishment zone. All right, here I am just kind of dry fitting all of these pieces, and I was gonna bring my title in at this point to dry fit, and this is where I realized it's stuck to that plastic, and I am not going to deal with that right now. I'm just going to pull out entirely new letters and start all over, and I will try and rescue those letters at some other point in the future because they really were stuck. In the meantime, I am still working with some embellishments. I did pull out my tray of embellishments from my kit, including these butterflies that were watercolored with that same mica paint, and they look kind of like stained glass. If you want to see the video where I create those, I will link you up in the corner, also in the description, so you can check that out. So now my background is dry, and I'm going to go ahead and adhere this down. I'm using plenty of adhesive because the watercolor will buckle the paper just a little bit, but it will flatten back out. And using extra adhesive, adding it to all these layers, that is going to help it flatten out as it pulls everything together. So plenty of adhesive, and that does the job mostly. And once you put it in your album, it'll be just fine. All right, there we go. We've got that ready. And now I'm ready to take the sections that I had kind of dry fit and now put them together. But as I'm working with these photos, I am not liking it. It's covering up too much of the background. I'm not getting enough of a border, which I was hoping for. And then I realized a good solution is just to trim down this one photo because it has a lot of blank space to it, and I don't need that much blank space. It kind of takes away from the focus of some of the other stuff. So with that trimmed down just a little bit, I see more of that background, and that is making me a little bit happier. And it's just such a small detail, but sometimes those little details kind of make a difference. All right, I got my title fixed there with fresh brand new letters, and I am looking for an alpha for a subtitle. I did pull that alpha out of my stash, but I always pull something out of my stash even when I kit build myself, so that is fine with me, and those alphas will make a nice finishing touch. All right, I got that journaling tag trimmed down to how it's going to fit on the page. And now I'm trying to remember how I dry fit all those embellishment clusters and put them all back together again. The journaling tag was giving me a little bit of trouble because it was leaving an awkward gap in between the photos and the tag. So I am working with this punch that I created and trying to figure out how to kind of fill in some of that space so it doesn't feel awkward. It feels purposeful, intentional, and complete. So I did decide to trim down one side of that. I'm going to put that at the bottom of my tag. And then even though I tucked the other piece up at the top, that's going to become another piece to this tag element that does the job of helping to fill everything else in. But before I get too far, I do need to make sure I get my lines on my journaling tag. So I'm using a white pigment ink to go ahead and add journaling lines. And this is my favorite journaling stamp, which is very, very old and does not exist on the market anymore, but it's mine and I love it and I use it all the time, so I keep using it. And with a little sticky note to cover up the zones that I don't want to overlap, I finish off the journaling lines, and here I am finishing off my little subtitle, another thing I wanted to get done before I finalize these embellishment clusters. And here is where I'm fixing that awkward gap between things, and then I can go ahead and redo the embellishments here so that it incorporates that zone into an entire cluster that comprises the tag and journaling and title all into one larger unit. And I managed to take the leaf of that flower embellishment and tuck it in between a gap in the journaling. So I always looked for those little kind of gaps to fill things in with. Speaking of gaps, up here at the top, I was having a heck of a time figuring out what to do with the gap between the photos. I kind of put pieces in place and I'm not really that happy with it. I left it while I thought about it, and then I realized, let's go ahead and add some more fiber there since I've got fibers in other areas of my clusters. It's missing in this one, so that is a little touch that I can add to make sure things are feeling cohesive. I'm also making sure that I'm tucking that tag down kind of in between the gap of the photos because it was feeling terribly awkward. I end up covering up most of that with these embellishments anyway, so it wasn't entirely necessary for me to do that, but it was there in place in case I changed my mind on those embellishments. But I am feeling pretty happy with how things are, and a very final finishing touch here is going to be these teeny tiny black hearts. I used these not too long ago, and I thought, who the heck is going to use black hearts on things? But here I am. I figured it out once before, and I'm doing it again, so black hearts maybe aren't that odd of a thing after all. And that, I thought, finished up my layout. As I've tipped it into the light, you can see the actual shine on there. But after I shut off the camera from that round, I realized I forgot to add a little title to the photo to put the name of the store on there. So I kind of put it on the photo itself where a store sign might be, despite the fact that they don't have a store sign there. So I have created one. So that is the official wrap up of this project. Do remember that the Mix It Up Monday group is a hop. I have all the links down in the description so you can follow along with that portion. And if you go check out CKC on the blog and the Facebook group, you can see what the designers are doing in terms of that challenge as well. Until I'm back with you again with more videos, I hope you have an artful day.